And we continue at 2:06 in the afternoon, the John Phillips Show. On this Jimmy Buffett Friday, Mr. Randy Wang's in the San Fernando Valley.
John, this morning I was listening to the LA City Council meeting, and when it came to public comment, it was friend of the show Daniel Gus talking about the ladies on Figueroa today.
On to general public comment. You guys are going to get sued so badly on First Amendment. It's shocking. But did you hear what Mr. Harris Dawson did to help the plaintiffs? What he said on Friday. The gentleman who comes here known as 3-inch Shrimp, mocking city council.
That's the Chinese guy.
Oh, that's quite a name. I wonder if that name is on his birth certificate.
The gentleman who comes here known as 3-inch Shrimp, mocking city council, made an interesting point, as a lot of the gadflies did. He talks about crime and sex workers on Figueroa. What did Mr. Harris Dawson do when somebody mentioned Figueroa, council members, city attorney? Mr. Harris Dawson said that Figueroa was not under the purview of the city. Are you kidding me?
And I had to bleep that.
Whoa, even Gus Works blew there.
It's the 4th longest street in the city, and the city council president is saying that the 4th longest street in the city is not under the city's purview? It goes right through his district. He just gave the biggest piece of evidence that you are censoring the public, and you're going to censor the N-word and the C-word?
And Figueroa, apparently.
I wonder why Figueroa is blasphemy.
Well, let's listen to the clip in question, because this is what Daniel Gus was referencing. This was earlier in the week at LA City Hall with 3-inch Shrimp.
My name is Mistress Shaniqua Goddess Bonisha, and I'm here to advocate for our Figueroa community.
Sounds like he has another alias.
Figueroa We need healthy Figueroa prostitute so our single man can have a chance to experience what sexual intercourse feels like, especially for someone who never seen a vagina before.
This is not within the jurisdiction of the Los Angeles City Council.
And you know what? Gus is right. He's talking about the hookers on Figueroa. That is in the jurisdiction of the Los Angeles City Council.
It's somewhat of a boutique issue, but yes, it is within the city limits.
We need more affordable Figueroa sex workers in our Figueroa community.
This is not within the jurisdiction of LA City Council, Mr. City Attorney.
Yes.
Can have some entertainment after a hard day of work after Figueroa community. We need a clean Figueroa community sex workers so we can have sex without being a Magic Johnson or HIV.
Boy, Magic Johnson took a shot for no reason.
Because we deserve clean sex in Figueroa community. Last week, I was trying to get Figueroa 3 minutes general non-agenda sex, but I was denied by the LAPD and by our city council. I deserve to have an orgasm in the city of LA.
Thank you, Speaker. Your time's expired.
So, yeah, they shut him down for his very legitimate public comment, and you're wondering if that is some of the evidence that will be piled in when the gadflies sue LA City Hall for banning all the slurs.
Can you imagine being a judge who has been to college for 7 years, passed the bar exam, practiced as an attorney, appointed to be a judge, works in the courthouse, Lady Justice is sitting there in the lobby. You walk up to the courtroom, you clock in at the plant, you go to work, and what you have to do on this particular day is adjudicate this. Probably something they didn't teach you about in law school. What are you going to do? 800-222-5222 is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. Well, we know that Gavin Newsom isn't governing the state of California. He's got podcasts to tape. And his most recent podcast was with a man I used to work with over at CNN, Ezra Klein.
Ezra Klein, who is a columnist for the New York Times and a writer, recently wrote a book called Abundance that is very much a criticism of the current Democrat Party and specifically the failed policies of California and Gavin Newsom.
And Gavin thought it would be a good idea to book this man for his podcast.
Well, all the big podcasts are having Ezra on, so Gavin thought he should as well. And the problem is, Gavin uses this podcast to deflect on his failures on the state and talk about national issues. And this entire 1 hour and 15-minute podcast was about Gavin Newsom's failures in the state of California.
Which is exactly what he doesn't want to talk about.
So without further ado, why don't we talk about one of the biggest failures in the state of California for the past 17 years, the inability to build a high-speed rail that was voted on by Californians in 2008. Let's hear what Gavin and Ezra had to say on their podcast.
But there is the fundamental disconnect, and you're absolutely right, as it relates to these large-scale, audacious projects. And I will give you your due on high-speed rail.
Oh, yeah, Gavin was the first one to bring it up.
Is he that dumb where he's just willingly stepping on rakes?
As critical or more than you have about this. In fact,
I hate high-speed rail more than you do.
We're living in some kind of alternate reality now, aren't we?
Gavin does host mirroring. It doesn't matter who he's talking to. He's in complete agreement with the person that he's talking to. He is a chameleon. He doesn't have any actual beliefs of his own. But if he has somebody coming on his podcast talking about a failure high-speed rail is, he's the first one to agree with him.
You know what's funny? He does that with the way he talks, too. When he's on with Marshawn Lynch, it's F this and F that the whole time, and he speaks with the black affect. When he's talking with a Republican, it is right of center, Gavin Newsom. I was a businessman. I owned a company. I was opposed by the left when I was mayor of San Francisco. When he's talking to Ezra Klein, he's an intellectual egghead. It's just such a strange aspect of his character.
You reference my pivot after I took this job as governor, where we called out the status quo, and now we're trying to level set.
No. What Gavin Newsom did was, when he first took office in 2019, he said, well, we don't have the money for San Francisco and LA, so how about Wasco to Merced?
So you're going from one spot in the middle of nowhere to another spot in the middle of nowhere.
The ridership's going to be huge.
I've actually been to Merced before. Have you been to Merced?
I have not.
I was driving back from Sacramento. This was after all those biblical floods on New Year's a few years back. And Merced was literally where I would stop to go to the bathroom.
Anything to write home about?
The Burger King was clean.
Well, maybe people in Fresno can take the high-speed rail to go to the Burger King in Merced.
Well, you know where I stopped before that.
Where's that?
I stopped at the Stop and Save on Coffee Road in Modesto because one man, Alfred Mitzenheimer, won the lottery twice buying tickets there. So that's where I stopped and bought a bunch of lottery tickets.
Of course. What are you supposed to do on a road trip? Not gamble?
No, you're supposed to stop at the Stop and Save on Coffee Road in Modesto.
Go nuts.
And get this back on track. But at least there's a vision. At least
there is no vision.
Zero vision. He's got a blindfold on.
Gavin wants credit for people before him saying, we wanted a high-speed rail. You don't get credit for that. You get credit for building one that was budgeted with what the voters passed.
And all of this is theoretical, too, because there is no high-speed rail. And now they're saying they need $7 billion more dollars. Well, why would you spend $7 billion more dollars for a train that you know is never going to be operational?
Well, and that $7 billion is just for the first segment, for the Wasco to Merced line. There is no funding. There is no idea of how you go from that $30 billion to the $110 billion. There is nowhere. Nobody is going to be ponying up the money for this thing. And if you think it's going to be from the revenue the train generates on the first segment, good luck with that.
Is $110 million what they're saying it's going to cost for the whole thing now?
$110 billion.
billion dollars, excuse me, yeah. Well, you better figure that in bananas because apes are going to be controlling the world by the time that train gets completed.
But at least there's a vision. At least Obama had a vision. He wanted to be big in big things. He wanted to do big things.
Yeah, but it didn't get built.
No, and by the way, this was Jerry Brown's project. This was Jerry Brown's project because Jerry Brown 2.0 wanted to make sure that he was remembered for something the way his father was. His father built the aqueduct. He built the state university system. He built the freeway system that we still use today. He was a builder. And then Jerry comes along in the 70s. He was kind of the anti-Field of Dreams candidate. He was one of these people that thought that overpopulation was going to ruin the globe. So if you don't build it, they won't come. So we just stopped building things in California. He wanted us to live in an era of limits. That was his entire first 2 terms. And then he realized that that was wrong. And he came back the second time and he thought, oh, I need to build something that's a monument to me. So this is what he chose. And this is what we're paying for. We're paying for a train to nowhere to feed that man's ego.
And at least progressive states still have a vision.
Yeah.
And they have a desire. I mean, and I think that's part of an abundance frame. And while it's difficult to manifest that vision,
then you don't get credit for it.
No, you get blame. That's what you get. Blame.
But this is Gavin Newsom to a T. Gavin is always about the flashy headline with no follow through. You don't get credit for saying you want to do something. You get credit for doing it.
But from his point of view, spending money, hiring people, creating different organizations, that in and of itself is success. It doesn't matter if they accomplish the mission that they're supposed to accomplish. Just the fact that they're there is successful.
I don't think it's an indictment necessarily. It's indictment in terms of our ability to deliver on time and under budget. But the vision, I think, is foundational and important. And I'd give...
He loves saying foundational.
Yeah, almost as much as mindful.
And I'd give credit to the Obama administration in that respect for all 3, even if they were 0 for 3.
Look, I'm all for vision. My upset, the point of this book is that I want the things to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, we can talk about high-speed rail. We must talk about high-speed rail. But before we get there for a second, I mean, I do get the question around this book because it is very critical of how liberals have governed. Well, then why aren't you just a Republican, right? If Texas is so good at housing. And the thing that I keep telling people is you've really confused means and ends here. Another thing that keeps coming up is like, you want deregulation. Isn't that a Republican thing? Well, not if I'm deregulating the government itself so it can deliver on the things you want.
Right.
Gavin doesn't want that.
No, he doesn't.
Right.
What's supposed to matter in politics is not the means, it's the ends.
Right.
And what I sort of want, what I'm trying to push here is for liberals to get a little bit more means agnostic and more like ends obsessed.
There you go.
So,
Well, that's the exact opposite of how Gavin Newsom is governed. Gavin does not govern on outcomes. It's all about good intentions and spending money.
No, go back to Pat Brown. That's the way liberals used to be. Pat Brown wanted to build things. FDR wanted to build things. New Deal Democrats in general wanted to build things. But then if you become one of these environmentalist nut jobs, you believe that we need to live within limits and housing is bad. Freeways are bad. Water projects are bad because they attract people and they're the worst. So we can't do any of that anymore. So they want to spend money and employ people, but never produce anything or build anything that we can all use and enjoy.
So the place where I probably differ a little bit in what you just said a second ago is that I don't want to give anybody credit for a vision that didn't happen. High-speed rail you have a great quote to me on this. I use it in the book. High-speed rail has undermined the public's faith in what can get done. It undermines the next high-speed rail, right? And the thing that I want to see happen is a kind of reckoning inside the governing, I would call it a culture. It's not just laws. It's not just regulations, although it is all those things, but it is a culture of what happens when the Democrats who are setting this stuff up get in the room together and people start raising their hands and saying, what about this? And what about that? And how about the other thing? And instead of hear and no, everybody gets kind of a little bit.
This is not what Gavin Newsom expected this podcast to be.
No, this man is explaining why Gavin failed.
And it's not the only thing going on. But there is something wrong in a culture that so often fails to deliver what it promises. I mean, not just high-speed rail.
In fact, it's almost everything Gavin Newsom has proposed since he became governor.
Yeah. How about homelessness? What happened with that, Gavin? How about crime?
We spent a whole bunch of money on it.
Yeah, we spent a bunch of money on the ambassadors. We spent a bunch of money on the social workers. What happened with that? How about EDD? How many billions of dollars did you give to criminals with EDD fraud? It's all the same story.
We're just getting started here, Johnny. We've got plenty more of Gavin trying to defend high-speed rail to somebody that he admires who says it ruins anybody's belief that Democrats in office can get anything done.
If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, you're monitoring the mailbag.
CP writes in at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. The Train to Nowhere funds the California Democrats. John and Randy follow the money and find out where the donations and surplus funds associated with the Train to Nowhere are going. The contractors are very likely helpful to Newsom and friends. Where the hell did $30 billion go with little to show for it? I mean, really? Well, it's not even just the contractors, Johnny, but as we've talked about plenty of times, just the people who sit on the High-Speed Rail Authority. It's a dumping ground for turned-out legislators.
Sure, it's a great job. You get a six-figure salary, you get a nice title, and you're not expected to do anything because no one expects that train to actually be built.
Took them 12 years just to do the permitting. That tells you everything you need to know about the state of California.
And Randy, we're about a half an hour away from being done with this week's episodes. But if you want to continue listening to us after we sign off at 3, that's easy to do.
It's so simple. Just search for The John Phillips Show wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's Apple Podcasts, iHeart, Spotify. You can even do a Google on the YouTube. Search for The John Phillips Show. Hit subscribe. You'll get every episode straight to your phone. And you're going to want to listen to us because you don't want to go out there and just start hitting random podcasts. You might end up on Pam Price's show.
She called me a crime boss.
And speaking of Pam Price, starting on April 1st, she can listen to us live in the Bay Area.
Oh, my.
I've been bipped several times.
Maybe we should invite her on.
Quite frankly.
Starting on Tuesday, Johnny and I are going to be broadcasting live every single day from noon to 3 on 790K ABC in Southern California and 810 KSFO in Northern California. We're going to be on both every day, so tell your friends, tell your family, hell, tell Pammy Price.
She called me a crime boss.
Right now, we're going through the sound of California Governor Gavin Newsom's podcast with guest Ezra Klein.
And Ezra Klein tells Gavin to his face what a failure high-speed rail is.
So high-speed rail. So when I went out and did the reporting on that, and I went up and down the track with the people building it and the people from the rail authority, and they told me a couple things that have stuck in my head that I don't try to resolve in the book, but I'd be curious for your thoughts. So one was that the Merced-Bakersfield leg, which is the leg that is currently being tried, I think they said they had something like line of sight, either had spent or had line of sight on something like, it was in the range of $11 to $15 billion.
We've $13.4 billion, of which 10.8 from the state and 2.6 from the feds.
All
roughly.
Right. And that the estimate on finishing Merced to Bakersfield was $36 billion.
Yeah, well, there's currently our estimates, and this plus or minus, and this is a moving target.
By the way, it was the day this podcast came out that the Legislative Analyst's Office said, "Oh, they're going to need $7 billion more."
Could this story go any worse for Gavin Newsom and the Democrats in Sacramento? I mean, is there any silver lining to the cloud at all? Is there anything you can point to and say, well, at least there's that?
Not really.
About $6.5 billion that we, based upon what we have, the current commitments, we had additional $3 billion from the federal government. Obviously, Biden Trump administration trying to vandalize that as they did the last time.
I don't know if I would call it vandalize, as investigate why the federal government has given this project so much money and there's no train.
Yeah, well, what I assume happened is that when you had Democratic administrations, the partisanship pull was so strong that they gave the money for this train without demanding results in return. And they're part of the problem, by the way, when they went ahead and did that.
I mean, Grampy Joe just saw, oh, train, I like train, here money.
Everyone in Delaware likes trains because it's the size of a postage stamp. You can go anywhere you want real easy.
And then cap and trade proceeds that will continue to accrue. If we extend cap and trade, can you bond against that? There's a lot.
Oh, that's interesting. So cap and trade, which is part of the reason why gas prices in California are so expensive, that money's supposed to theoretically mean that companies that pollute need to buy climate offsets and buy these credits, and then we would plant trees and that would even out the environment. Cap and trade money, which is apparently getting extended, is going towards high-speed rail.
Of course. And everyone knew that cap and trade money was just a slush fund for the Democrats to use.
And if you remember that meeting of the California Air Resources Board where they enacted all those new fuel standards, the real thing that was the catalyst that was going to raise gas prices was that they were going to increase the fees for cap and trade. They're doing it because of the high-speed rail. They're going to tax you through added fees to the price of gasoline to fund the train that nobody wants.
This is what they do. Remember when Darrell Steinberg added an income tax here in California for money that was supposed to go to mental health services?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that money was rated for the general fund a long time ago, too. This is what they do. When they need money, it doesn't matter how they sold a bond. It doesn't matter how they sold a tax. It doesn't matter how they sold whatever it was at the time that they sold it. That money will be grabbed and used for whatever they want to use it for at that given time.
Variations.
So you're saying you think you have line of sight on the money with a delta of $6.5 billion?
Roughly. Yeah.
Okay. And what a bunch of the people working on it said is like, look, in the end, for this to really work, it needs to be LA to San Francisco. And that would cost $110 billion.
Yeah. Well, we're looking at it, and I don't, look,
Someone's a little flat-footed. He did a nervous laugh.
Yeah, because there's no acceptable answer to that.
Nobody voted on a train from Central Valley to Central Valley. How does that even help the Central Valley?
No, what Gavin Newsom is like is a crooked contractor where you go in and you say, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. Let's put it in the contract. And then you start and you go, well, you have to manage your expectations. Aren't you familiar with COVID? Aren't you familiar with the supply chain crisis? Aren't you familiar with inflation? You can't expect that to still happen.
Here I am. We extended high-speed rail. The idea is to get it in these density and population corridors, which is the point you make in the critique.
But it's not going to go there, ever.
No, you have 2 years left in your term. There is 0% chance that's going to happen. 0% chance. It's not going to happen in the next governor's 2 terms.
The soonest the Fresno part of this train is supposed to be running is 2033. And I'm sure that number is going to get delayed.
I can't even believe they're having this conversation with a straight face. Really. These are educated people who know better. Yet they still have to do this kabuki theater and pretend.
And get to Fresno, for example, to Gilroy, where Caltran is, and we can then connect to San Jose and into San Francisco. You have the existing infrastructure in place. That's about an hour. You get into Palmdale. Now you're connecting with the new Bright Line.
Everything he's talking about, there's no money for.
No, and by the way, if you're talking about using existing rail, that's not high speed. That's not how this was sold.
It was sold that it was going to take a little over 2 hours to get from LA to San Francisco, and that's never happening.
Nope.
That's going all the way.
By the way, how long's the flight time from LA to San Francisco?
About an hour. And
that's
by the
going all
way,
the way to Vegas.
you don't have to go out of LAX. You can go out of John Wayne. You can go out of Ontario, Burbank, San Diego, Palm Springs, Santa Barbara, whatever.
Heck, you can do that JSX flight from Burbank to Oakland, from Burbank to the San Francisco Bay Oakland Airport.
That's going all the way to Vegas and one of the fastest growing parts of the state in Palmdale, where middle-class families can still afford a home.
He's running out of breath again.
Well, he's running out of brain cells, too.
And so those are component parts. And that's where I think that $36 billion number came from. Those three component parts roughly add up to that. Now, the Tehachapi Mountains, getting them over, all of those larger issues, those are issues that obviously are component parts of this larger.
And this doesn't even just go back to 2008. The High-Speed Rail Authority was formed in the 90s. This has been talked about since the 70s. If they still have no plan to tunnel through the Tehachapi Mountains, this is never happening.
No, these are people who just need to keep it going on as long as possible. Everyone who works for this project is like George Costanza at Play Now.
And that'll be, after
over the course of many
years,
years,
right?
Yeah. Oh,
but
well,
I think the big question people have about it, and you hear people asking this all the time, is that,
and I inherited this.
Yes, you inherited this. This is not your fault.
This was not my baby from
Gavin, I'm going to give you some advice from one broadcaster to another. Don't talk over your guest.
And by the way, it's not like he wasn't in politics when this was being debated. He supported it.
I'm not blaming Governor Newsom on this
God
one.
bless. I'm just trying to get it back on track.
But I think the question is, if there is not a line of sight on that 36 to 110 billion, right? That doesn't exist. And that's a very hard thing.
Well, you try to get revenue generation. Once you start getting the large population corridors, if you could connect Silicon Valley to Central Valley, which is the foundational argument.
It doesn't connect there.
No, and it's not going to anytime soon.
And you can start sharing. We're looking at train sets that have interoperability, not just with Brightline, but high desert corridors. You have two private sector partners, and we're actually procuring train sets very, very shortly. As I say, we did the railhead. We're starting to lay track. This thing's starting to get very, very real.
17 years later, it's starting to get real.
No, it's not starting to get real. It's starting to get real dumb. Actually, it's been real dumb for a long time.
Some of the projects you did see are projects that will have profound impacts economically in terms of the upzoning, particularly in the Fresno corridor.
Here we go. It's all about the money that we spent in Fresno.
Yep. You are employing people in Fresno. A lot of people have made a lot of money to not build a train.
And Fresno is a very important part of the state.
The big worry I heard from transportation types is that the ridership in those corridors, as fast growing as they may be, is not enough to throw off money. It's not even enough to handle that operating budget, very likely.
Who's going to ride the train from Bakersfield, outside Bakersfield, to Merced? What exactly is the purpose unless you happen to live in Fresno and you go to UC Merced?
But all of these questions, the question's not even an honest question because no one's going to even have that option. This would be like, well, what happens if the moon was made out of green cheese? Well, we'd all have quesadillas. But it's not, so I don't know what to tell you.
And it's definitely not going to throw off money that's going to complete a $110 billion train. And that we're finishing something that in the end is going to be a monument to not being able to build the thing we wanted.
Yeah, we're not going to be able to build a new airport. We're not, the end of the day.
Why can't you build a new airport?
Yeah, there are plenty of areas that probably need them.
Didn't we talk about forever they were going to build a second LAX in Palmdale? How about we go back to that?
They were talking about building commercial airports in San Bernardino and I think Adelanto.
We're not, the end of the day, we've got these constraints that are well established already, these pre-existing constraints. There's not a high-speed rail in the system that's not enjoying some popularity and success. Most, at least, are wildly popular.
Yeah, the ones in Europe and Tokyo that exist.
You know what we don't have here, Gavin? High-speed rail.
It's an experience no one's had in the United States of America. At least we're out there daring.
That you don't get credit for that.
He is the kid that got the trophy for participation. And he wants a participation trophy for being the governor that mismanaged high-speed rail. If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, you're monitoring the mailbag.
Jason writes in at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com and says, Gavin doesn't know Jack. My fellow esteemed Californians, John and Randy, anyone who knows anything about trains in Tehachapi knows that the Tehachapi Loop already exists for a very particular reason and is the eighth wonder of the world. I don't think you can safely tunnel those mountains because they contain many seismic fault lines. This project is 100% about corruption and enriching the right people. There will never be an example of what they sold us. The technologies does not exist. Fire them all. Thank you very much, Jason. Go Titans.
I love that letter from beginning to end. We're going through the sound of California Governor Gavin Newsom's podcast with journalist Ezra Klein.
And Johnny, this was what I thought the most fascinating part of this entire exchange on the high-speed rail, because it never occurred to me that there was a reason why the state of California decided to start this project in the Central Valley instead of, I don't know, starting it by electrifying San Francisco to San Jose or electrifying Los Angeles to Orange County. Why did it start in the middle and go out? And there's a very specific and stupid reason. Here we go.
I mean, I love to intellectualize all these things. What coulda, shoulda, woulda. But there's certain foundational facts. And interestingly, you made the point in the book that I have to over and over make to people. Why did we start in the Central Valley? It was a requirement, federal requirement for federal dollars. Now, it's not the worst idea. I mean, the Intercontinental Railroad.
Just to say it was a requirement because the federal program wasn't just for high-speed rail. It was to start where you had air pollution for marginalized communities.
Yeah.
It was because of equity, John. The Barack Obama administration said you're only getting the $3 billion for the train if you build it somewhere where we can deal with poor health outcomes due to air pollution.
And by the way, if you haven't picked up on this yet, if equity is a factor in building something like a train, the project is all about hiring people, making sure your friends have gigs, and whatever your altruistic reasons are. It has nothing to do with creating a product that people will use and will benefit the community that the project is serving.
Air pollution for marginalized communities.
Yeah.
Which is both like, I just want to say this because it's part of why I'm saying this in the book, is that all sounds great. And you can come up with reasons to start in Central Valley, but it's the part of the state that will generate the least political capital to keep going.
Yeah,
because it has the least dense ridership.
Right.
But
it's also part of the state that does have. I mean, you talk about ignorance, poverty, and disease. You talk about the issues of air quality and life expectancy. You talk about
he's getting to Shapiro levels of speed again.
Yeah, he really goes 100 miles an hour, something that the train will never do.
The economic opportunities.
Yeah, but
and
what addresses air quality is the whole track.
Well, ultimately, a fully electrified track.
Yes.
I mean, that ultimately will. And that's the
this
benefit.
is just, to me, it's an example. Yeah. This one wasn't California's fault. This was the Obama administration. But
well, California didn't need to take that federal money, but that's what all these projects are about. It's about getting those matching federal dollars so you can spend money on all your friends.
Yep. And don't for one second think that California was saying, no, that's a bad idea. We shouldn't do that. We should do this. They were on board too.
It's an example of they should have given, I want to say what I think should have happened here. They should have given you whatever $3 billion. Right? That's what that grant was. And just said, use it for high-speed rail. Yeah. Right? It shouldn't have been a stacked series of ideas. Right? It doesn't all need to be a triple axle. Right. Yeah. High-speed rail is hard enough, as you know better than I do.
It's, representative democracy is a tough thing. Dictatorships are a little easy. But
that wasn't representative democracy.
Well,
nobody knew that.
No, a lot of folks.
What is Gavin trying to assuage now?
He's essentially saying, well, we had to please any number of constituencies within the Democratic Party. And that's just what you have to do in a democracy. You have to make everyone happy. And sometimes, in order to make people happy, you have to do truly stupid things that don't benefit most people.